So good evening, good afternoon, good morning, everyone. It's my great pleasure to start the PESC webinar series, the monthly webinar series that will be starting from today. So every month we will be having a different country starting from next month to describe their roadmaps, their activities, and how they think that they can involve their countries in moon activities. The PESC project, the aim of the PESC project is to involve developing countries, emerging space countries into the Moon Village and moon activities. So we would like to start this monthly webinar series by identifying why it's important that emerging space countries become a part of moon exploration. And we will also be talking about the Oasis 2045. Thank you. The Vice President of the Moon Village Association, John Mankins, is with us, and he will be talking about the Oasis 2045. And this is important because the roadmaps, which is the core document that every country in the PESC project produce, is inspired by the Moon Village Architecture Working Group roadmap, which is also related to the Oasis 2045. So I will start with the question, why moon exploration for emerging space country? If you are from an emerging space country, which is the vast majority of the world population, and you try to propose projects for funding, you will face a lot of difficulties. Why should we fund such huge projects that cost a lot, but with no return? Unlike space applications, of course, space application now has proved to be really important when we are talking about remote sensing or communication. But still, there is lack of awareness to answer this question. So today, in my presentation, I will try to have two arguments or two ideas that I would like to share with everyone. My first idea is the Bogota Declaration, and the second one is the Explorer Gene. I will discuss this in more details, and it will be great if you share with me your thoughts, your ideas by emails to further improve the ideas. Before that, I will start from a historical context until today, which is the rush to the moon, the rush to the moon by developed countries, and then I will conclude, and then I will ask John Mankins to talk about the Oasis 45. So, since the very early time of the space era, the launch of Sputnik, we witnessed a huge development. We witnessed big steps in space exploration. The first man in orbit, the first woman, the first plant, until the first human in the moon. This era extended from the launching of Sputnik by the end of the 50s until the mid 70s. There are important aspects in this era. First, it was a competition between the two superpowers in the background of the Cold War, the Soviet Union and the United States. All space exploration projects were funded from the governments. And we saw really fast acceleration, fast steps, huge steps. No one imagined in the mid-50s that we will have people walking in the moon by the end of the 60s. This was a huge step. An important aspect of the early space era is the signature of the Outer Space Treaty. Among the many clauses in the Space Treaty, no country, which was an agreement, by the way, between the United States, the Soviet Union, and the United Kingdom. Among the clauses, no country should declare sovereignty over any part of space, whether the moon or space in general. I will return to this part again. In the mid-70s, something different happened. As you can see here in the picture, you see the Apollo and the Soyuz are docking together in the right image in a museum, and you see to the left when that happened I think it was in 1975. When that happened, a Russian cosmonaut and an American astronaut were shaking hands, and this marks a change in the space domain, because now, instead of the competition between the United States and the Soviet Union, we see a cooperation. We also saw the participation of Europe and Japan during that era. However, and in contrast to the early space era time, the competition era, the cooperation era witnessed a de-acceleration of space exploration activities and moon exploration. Instead of that, we started to see focus on space application, satellites for Earth observation, communications, and so on. In the 90s, in my perspective, there was a new era, which is the involvement of developing countries. Now, developing countries in the 90s are interested in space applications, but not in space exploration. Again, we didn't see the involvement of developing countries. We started to see also a boom in the private sector. We started to see a lot of new companies. And an important discovery that happened in 2004 that is also a game changer is the discovery of water in the lunar poles. In the pictures here, you can see to the left the south pole of the moon, of the lunar surface. You can see the water concentration in blue, and you can see also in the north pole some water concentration as well. The discovery of water means life. It means that moon is no longer a dead body orbiting Earth. We can utilize water not only to support life, but also to produce a lot of important materials to support lunar activities. Another important thing, in addition to the discovery of water, what causes the moon rush that we are witnessing right now is the maturity of technology. You can see in this graph, for example, the percentage of federal budget and the calendar year. This is NASA's budget as a percentage of the federal budget of the United States. You can see in the 60s, 67 until 69, there is a peak. It looks like Burj Khalifa. There is a huge peak, and this was because the funding toward the moon project, the Apollo program, in the 60s and 70s. And then, of course, you can see here the decline until today, which is about 0.5%, which is very small. Due to the maturity of technology, NASA is capable to return back to the moon sustainably without significant increase in the budget. So those two reasons, the discovery of water and the maturity of technology, are driving the rush to the moon that we are witnessing right now. In 2017, the White House called NASA for a moon project that is long-term and sustainable, and by that they wanted to have to utilize lunar resources and also in an international cooperation. NASA responded with the National Space Exploration Campaign with 5 strategic goals. 4 strategic goals are focusing only on moon exploration. one strategic goal was for the ISS, but for the moon. And there was an emphasis in the report in international cooperation, the utilization of resources and sustainable presence of humanity. NASA is not alone. All the major space agencies around the world have announced similar programs, different timelines. But this rush, actually, we are witnessing a new thing here. Decision makers, policy makers are actually driving this. So we didn't see that before. Previously, we saw a lot of engineers, scientists who are interested about moon missions, proposing ideas, but this time it's the policymakers. So now, why it's important for emerging countries to be part of this moon rush? I think the Bogota Declaration is a case that that can be repeated in the future. In the picture here, you can see countries in the equator: Indonesia, you can see Zaire, you can see Colombia, Brazil. Those countries joined forces in Bogota, and they questioned the Outer Space Treaty. As I mentioned before, the Outer Space Treaty was ratified in 1967, and the Bogota Declaration happened in 1976. So they questioned the Outer Space Treaty because they didn't involve. They didn't involve in drafting this treaty. They wanted to claim sovereignty over geostationary orbit. Geostationary orbit is considered as a natural resource because you know, it's important for communication satellites and some remote sensing applications as well. So it's considered, actually, it's considered as a natural resource. It was eventually rejected by the international community, but this is not the point here. The point is that some countries felt that there is unjust distribution of resources in space, and they made action. In the image here, in the picture, you see in 1976, none of these countries used to have a space program. The African countries, for example, as you can see, but they started to be involved because of resources. And this is a key word to me. I think it's the utilization of resources in space is a huge motivation for emerging countries. But someone needs to inform decision makers that this is a big deal, this is important. Going to the moon and building such large-scale structures will require their utilization of resources. So, and in order to have opportunity for everyone should be involved in drafting policies and also to participate actively in moon activities. Another idea here I would like to share with you is the explorer gene. It was proof that about 25% of humanity love to explore because this is part of their nature. It's in their blood. And it was discovered that the explorer gene actually exists. I mean, if you look at Earth from the moon and you try to focus, I mean, you try to imagine how it feels. You might imagine something different. It's really inspiring. There is, I think there is something like a call to expand and go to the moon and also elsewhere in the solar system and beyond. So exploration is in our gene, in our blood. So in summary, I would also like to give time for John to describe the Oasis 2045. The moon rush is a reality in the ground. It's happening. This is important to inform decision makers in emerging space country. They don't realize this fact. And it's happening in a large scale, very fast. We don't want to repeat the Bogota Declaration because it's an example of a conflict over space resources. We would like to involve everyone to draft policies for just distribution of resources. And of course, if it's going to be just, everyone should be involved. A space exploration is in our blood. We will never survive. We will never move from Africa to the world without the drive to explore. So by the end of this presentation, in conclusion, I would like to say that the question in principle, why moon exploration, is a wrong question. I don't like to use it. Rather, I would say that the right question is, what will emerging space countries lose from being late, being part, of course, of moon activities? And finally, space exploration, starting from the moon, is a destiny, not a choice. So thank you very much. I tried to make it short, about 20 minutes. I would love to hear your opinion, your ideas. If you like to share it with me by emails, or you can also ask a question in the chat. After John finishes, we will dedicate 10 to 15 minutes for a Q&A session. That will include my presentation and as well and John presentation as well. So thank you very much, John. Please, the mic is yours.
Thank you, Ghanem. I enjoyed your presentation very much and appreciate this opportunity to speak with the PESC community. I would like to begin with just a brief introduction on the Lunar Oasis 2045 concept and the activities which are ongoing within the Moon Village Association Architecture Working Group. So I like to start here. These are some images that were shared at one of the Moon Village meetings a couple of years ago by Professor Madhu Thangavalu of USC. It depicts several early visions of the lunar exploration and development going back 155 years, 57 years to Jules Verne of 1865. And it's particularly significant, I think, that these visions, 1865, 1895 lunar mining, Frau Mund, the movie by Fritz Lang in 1929, all of these visions revolve around private ventures to go to the moon to try to seek economic benefits from lunar resources. And as Ghanem mentioned a few minutes ago, one of the huge changes in the moon as it's viewed by individuals and companies and governments and academics is the verification that there are vast quantities of ice trapped at the lunar poles of the moon's lunar poles, both the South Pole and the North Pole, and that this ice represents tremendous new opportunities for utilization of the moon. When I was a young engineer in the 1980s at JPL, it was a known fact that the moon was dry and dead and of no particular interest in space applications or space science or space exploration. There were certainly lunar scientists, but nobody listened to them. Nobody had any particular interest in funding programs concerning the moon. In the last decade, all of this has changed. And today there are many, many companies, many countries all going to the moon. This set of logos represents the International Space Exploration Coordination Group membership. The shortcoming of the ISIC-G, as it's called, is that it's only space agencies from fairly significant space players. The Moon Village Association, of course, is not only space agencies, but also companies, individuals, universities, and others. But this reflects the huge change, as Ghanem highlighted a few minutes ago, between today and 50 years ago, when it was basically just the United States versus the then Soviet Union, to today, when there are just a plethora of missions and activities and organizations all pursuing the moon. So the Moon Village Architecture Working Group, during the last 3 years, has been doing a case study looking at the concept of the first human outpost on the moon. We describe this as a lunar Oasis 2045, and it is an extension of work that has been done previously by the ISIC-G and looks at both the lunar surface and activities in the vicinity of the moon, what is called cislunar space. The methodology for the study began with the definition of requirements, using requirements to drive the selection of a site for this prospective Oasis settlement in 2045, description of the concept, characterization of a concept of operations, identifying building blocks, and working toward now modeling of the building blocks and the concept of operations, and trying to better identify interfaces, interoperability, and standards. All of this comes, as I mentioned, from the ISIC-G roadmap, the Global Exploration Roadmap depicted here from a 2020 report by the ISIC-G, indicates a series of missions and activities, many of them part of the Artemis program, others part of the China and Russians international lunar research station plans, but all of them in this roadmap essentially stopping in the early 2030s. And one of the things that the MVA wanted to do was to look to the longer term, not just look at the next decade, but look in greater detail at the longer term in order to provide a framework for others, such as the emerging space countries, to begin to prepare, to put into place both educational programs and technology development activities to become a part of humanity's permanent expansion to the moon. The case study involves 6 zones focused around the lunar South Pole, which is the location that was chosen for the location of the settlement, Oasis 2045, local ice deposits in the permanently shadowed regions, that's zone 2, the lunar far side for zone 3, because of its the low radio noise on the far side. It's blocked from the Earth, so that can't see the Earth as a source of radio noise. And then moving back from the moon in low lunar orbit, cislunar space, and to Earth orbit. So these are the areas of interest in this current case study. This image just shows you in a little more detail the energetics of going from one place to another. And this is extremely important with regard to the economics of lunar transportation and transportation in cislunar space that might be enabled or facilitated by lunar resources, lunar propellants. To get those propellants, one of the central issues we are looking at in the case study has to do with mining. This is a particular concept for ice mining that's been promoted by the Colorado School of Mines here in the US. It has to do with reflecting providing reflecting sunlight down into these permanently shadowed regions and using the sunlight in the permanently shadowed region as a way of extracting the ice from the lunar regolith. We are taking a new approach, a different approach within the MVA case study. This is a depiction of the vicinity of the south pole of the moon. The south pole of the moon is just on it happens to be located in the upper left rim of the Shackleton crater, shown here on the right. This location is where we have chosen to look at Oasis 2045. We've done a number of studies on that subject, and the targets for ice mining include a permanently shadowed region, which is the Sputus PSR, as well as two major craters, Sverdrup crater and the Gerlach crater. And you can see from the scale that this location for Oasis 2045 is within 10 or 15 kilometers of two of these ice-bearing regions and within 30 kilometers of the third. And so it's very conveniently located for multiple locations where water ice has been detected. The concept is a modular mining vision. This particular concept comes from a Moon Village Association institutional member, Offworld, and it illustrates using small electric vehicle robotic miners as the approach to going down, mining the ice-bearing regolith, and then bringing it back to a location to be to have the water extracted. A little bit more on the topography. So this is the location, as I mentioned, where we're looking at Oasis 2045. These are topographical maps showing the, it's hard to see them, I know, and I apologize, but basically we've looked at the local topology, the topography of these regions, both where the Oasis 2045 would be, along the ridge line, where power stations could be located, and the Sputus PSR, which is the first target for prospective ice mining. I wanted to take just a moment and switch to a different perspective. And I find this to be extremely helpful in thinking about the moon. So I think you now should be looking at a simulated view of the lunar South Pole. In the center, the circular object, the symmetrical object, is Shackleton crater. It's about 19 kilometers across. On the lower center line from Shackleton crater is the lunar South Polar Ridge. And just on the Earth facing, Earth is towards the top here, on the Earth facing face of this ridge line is the location that we've chosen for Oasis 2045. I'm going to turn on the simulation here. It's a movie. It'll run for a minute or so, and it'll run through multiple lunar days, each of which is about 27 and a half or 27 and three-quarter days long, terrestrial days long. And I'd like you to please watch what happens to the sun. So as you can see, during the course of 28 days, there's a tremendous variation in the amount of sunlight that falls on these different locations. Some of them, like the bottom of Shackleton, are permanently in shadow, and others, like the Gerlach, like Sverdrup, like the Sputus PSR, have some portion of the base of that feature that is permanently in shadow. And although it is often in the sun, even the South Polar Lunar Ridgeline is occasionally in shadow. And during the course of a lunar year, this video goes through an entire lunar year. During the course of a lunar year, the moon is at a slight tilt, and the orbit of the moon is not perfectly aligned with the sun. And so you get some variation over the course of 365 days in what gets illuminated. Right there, you saw almost the entire lunar south polar region was in darkness for just a day or two in terms of the prospective illumination. There it is again. And so this means that energy and light are at a great premium. And in these regions that are permanently shadowed, it is exceptionally cold. The temperatures are on the order of 40 or 50 degrees above absolute zero. So 40 or 50 Kelvin at like 233 or minus 233 degrees Celsius. Okay. I just thought that was I think that's a very useful way to actually look at the data and have in your mind what the moon will be like. So going back now to the presentation for just a couple of minutes. So now this all looks very bright and cheery, but in point of fact, the real moon looks like the simulation that I was showing you just a second ago. And so you can see that that power, energy, lighting, all of these, and temperatures, all of these are crucial to the successful establishment of the permanent human presence at the South Pole, and to the utilization of the development of lunar resources. This just gives you a closer up view, topological view of the location for the Oasis 2045 habitation, for a location that we're looking at for a prospective spaceport to serve Oasis 2045. The distance between these two, the settlement and the spaceport, is about 4 kilometers, 3 kilometers. And then in between them, there is a very nice location that's an impact feature that's somewhat colder and may be very useful for storing cryogenic materials. This just gives you the same view. This is a topographical map. This is the collection of data from the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter and other missions to the moon of the last 10 years. And then this gives you the distances. So from 1 to 4 is about 4 kilometers. So from the Oasis to the spaceport is about 4 kilometers, and with the fuel depot in between them. This is a metro map. If you're familiar with metro maps, intended to provide a high level configuration for the operations, the concept of operations for the lunar oasis. It reflects a variety of functional capabilities, including local agriculture, logistics, repair and maintenance of systems, the spaceport and other activities, and all connected through a backbone of power stations and energy storage that will be required because of the variation in the illumination that we discussed a moment ago. One of the key products, which is always being updated from the architecture case study, is the identification of building blocks. These building blocks represent the systems that go into that concept of operations that I described, and the building blocks represent opportunities for the involvement of a variety of organizations, institutions, individuals, countries in lunar activities. And it's not just the same old players going back for decades, because the functions, the capabilities that are needed for long-term human presence and activity at the moon are quite different than the capabilities that are necessary for simple sortie missions and exploration. If you're going to the moon for a day, it's not at all the same toolkit, the same set of building blocks. If you then it will be when we are going to the moon to stay, to establish a settlement, establish permanent human presence. These building blocks can be configured and looked at in functional terms, in terms of how they relate to one another, i.e. It's not just a list of items, but also interactions among those items. And this is, of course, a very simplified diagram, for example, indicating that regolith mining interconnects with haulers of the regolith that's being mined, and the haulers interact with the processing of lunar ice to make water and extract other volatiles. I'm following along this path. And of course, a processing facility has to interact with the prospective fuel depot. The fuel depot has to interact with the spaceport. The spaceport interacts with and refuels vehicles coming and going from the moon. So essentially, what we're trying to do is provide a first look at what a lunar economy and a lunar ecosystem would look like 25 years from now, and how it would emerge over the decades between now and then, from the initial lunar missions which are being undertaken, for example, under the Artemis program. This is just a diagram of the approach to system modeling and preliminary cost estimation for this ecosystem. This is a rather daunting clip from a spreadsheet model that's been developed and continues to evolve, that looks at the various building blocks in the context of their interactions. As I mentioned previously, I'll show you just one example in a moment. So we're taking a rather business modeling approach to all of this by putting together use cases. Use cases include the end-to-end consideration of some one topic. So for example, the production of fuel and the sale of the fuel on the lunar surface to both government and commercial transportation services. Spaceport services, things like personnel transportation to and from the spaceport and the Oasis settlement, and so on. And I won't go through all of these in detail, but the idea is to indicate that the model, it's not comprehensive. It's not an N by N matrix, although I certainly looked at that as too complex to undertake in any reasonable length of time. But the idea is to identify this framework and then to make slices through it, looking at the end-to-end characteristics of a use case, such as providing lunar propellants to vehicles in lunar orbit, which is a key issue. This just shows the food chain for that first use case. Lunar surface provided propellant for a reusable lunar lander that would come and go from the spaceport. There are a number of others, one set of steps for each of the use case models. Again, I won't go into all of these. The individual building blocks that I mentioned are called into service in one or more of these individual use cases. As I said, because of time, I won't go into all of these. I do want to just show you, though, then how does this all turn out? What happens with this? Well, what we're trying to do is, for example, look at, in this case, a reusable lunar lander system. This particular concept was put together by Yushnoi State Design Office and presented at an NVA workshop, online workshop in 2020. it identified for this particular concept an oxygen hydrogen powered reusable lunar lander, RLL, and identified how much propellant was necessary to land how much payload on the lunar surface, and then back away from that and determine, based on that amount of fuel, in this case 9 tons, how much regolith had to be processed to deliver that much fuel. And then use, because the data suggests that regolith is in these dark locations is about 5% water by mass. Well, then you can back out how much, what's the energy requirement for mining and processing that much regolith to get that much liquid oxygen and liquid hydrogen to fuel a lander delivering 9 tons to the lunar surface, or 8 tons of payload to the lunar surface. And from that, to determine how much energy is required for the mining operation. So if you follow the logic here, and I hate to go back so far, but the logic here is to start with the vehicle and the payloads and back out the fuel requirements in order to determine the regolith mining requirements, in order to then determine what energy system is necessary in order to drive regular transportation to and from the lunar surface. And that's the overall methodology for looking at this. This is another example. This is a self-sufficient agricultural system sized for 40 individuals. I won't go through the details here because of time, but the methodology is quite similar. Again, trying to get out what would be the power requirement, how much power is necessary to provide self-sufficient agriculture at the south pole of the moon for a permanent population of 40 individuals. This just shows you again the way the cost estimation is done, so we can try to get a handle on what would the costs of these systems be. This is the modeling for the lunar ice mining system that I mentioned a moment ago. And I don't have there was a particular slide I wanted to have, but I evidently didn't include it. And you can see, or you can make variations in some of these parameters. Here, I'll go back to this one, including, for example, what's the assumed carrying capacity, or what's the speed with which the lunar rover travels carrying the regolith that's going to be processed. And you can find, by making variations in those critical input variables, you can find, for example, how many mining systems do you need? How much are they going to weigh? How much energy do you need to recharge those electric vehicles to produce propellants at a rate that is consistent with the transportation with the reusable lunar lander and a certain traffic model going to and from the moon. So it's quite high level, but nevertheless, the kinds of numbers that we're trying to get at will provide, I think, good information to inform decisions on how many miners do we need? What kind of power plants do we need? What kind of agricultural systems? And to provide a clear business case that then individuals could use to try to promote their own new ventures, their own programs, to get at future opportunities in joining the permanent expansion of human activity to the moon. So we're doing this case study. We've looked at the specific location and the CONOPS that I described. We have a high-level approach to system modeling, but one which is designed to allow the extraction of key data, such as power levels and costs, and for a variety of the building blocks. We've got a set of additional requirements that we're now looking at to try to comport with the sustainable moon goals and objectives identified by the UN. And we envision that strict protocols will be required, both to capture science data as part of lunar activities, and to minimize the release of any volatiles or waste during lunar surface operations. I think it is incumbent on anyone planning to go to the moon and be part of the emerging lunar ecosystem over the coming 2 decades or 3 decades to guarantee, to assure that the moon is not harmed, that human heritage on the moon is not lost. We are continuing to do studies and certainly welcome the engagement and participation of members of the PESC community in these activities. Thank you, Gautam. Thank you, members.
Thank you, John. Thank you very much for this explanation. Of course, the reason why we are starting this webinar series with the Moon Oasis 2045, because this is the core of the roadmap. What we normally do, we identify strength points in team's country. We have 8 countries. We have 8 teams representing different 8 countries. And we try to link this strength point with the Moon Village, as described by John, for 100 years, for the coming 100 years, and then we try to break down these activities into smaller projects and measurable plans over the years to cover. So this was released, I think, early this year, the Oasis 2045. So and previous activities actually was based on the previous version. So this is an invitation for all PESC teams to update their roadmaps based on the new version. So thank you very much, John. I think we have about 10 minutes for questions. If there is anyone would like to write down a question, we will be happy to answer you. So there is a question from Rob Muller. Where is the updated report available?
Yeah, the latest material that was published in a paper is from last year's IAC in Dubai. It was presented in the D3-1 session. In addition, in January, I think it was in January, we had the 2021-2022 Architecture Working Group workshop. And although there is not at this time a written report from that workshop that lasted for several hours over 3 days, the videos, including all of the slides that were presented at that workshop, are available on the MVA website. And so that's probably the between the report from last year and the presentations at the workshop, online workshop last winter, that together represents the best detailed information on the activities of the Architecture Working Group.
Okay, we have a raised hand from Mario. Mario, do you like to ask a question? Okay. Okay. So is there any other question? We still have time. Okay. I think in this case, I would like, there is one, I think, comment or question right here by Carlos. He's saying, I think that one of the main challenges will be lunar manufacturing, because everything that is manufactured on the moon will be huge cost savings for the project. Do you have any approach for awarenesses about this variable in the project? And this is a question for you, John.
Yeah, so, and by the way, I think we may need to send it out later. I'm just looking now. I know it's on the MVA website. Rob Mueller asked if there was a link that we could post to the workshop proceedings from the architecture working group meeting of last winter. And I don't want to take a moment and look for it now, but I'm sure it's there. We just need to provide it. I think there are, I think, three different aspects that are critical to reduce the logistics requirements of materials and items delivered from Earth to the moon. Certainly, the first and foremost is the production of consumables, production of water, production of oxygen and hydrogen, and so on. Secondly, is lunar manufacturing, making physical objects out of lunar materials. And third is making, I'll say, advanced objects like solar arrays and later actual electronics or sophisticated items out of lunar materials. The one that Carlos asked about in particular is the manufacturing one. And that's one where there are several ongoing programs and projects, both in the US and internationally, looking at the fabrication of structural systems out of lunar regolith. So both landing pads and roads, obviously, but also shelters, pressurized volume, more sophisticated pressurized volume being for gases or liquid cryogen tankage, pipes, internal materials for the habitation systems. A really important lunar manufacturing challenge is the manufacturing of soil. I know lots of people like hydroponics. It's a longer term conversation, maybe over a coffee. But I think that the actual fabrication and manufacturing of lunar soil is probably the number one challenge for human habitation, because of its importance in achieving a closed loop, ecologically sustainable and biologically based life support system. So there are a number of activities going on around all of these. And I would just suggest that you try to identify where you can get information. There's a wealth of information in the papers that are presented at the IAC each year, and you get the whole international community together. So you might look at the IAC proceedings from 2021, from last fall in Dubai. Before that, the online version in 2020, and the prior year 2019 as well. So over those 3 years, it gives you who's working on what, the names and contact information for key researchers in the field, and it really is a tremendous resource.
We have another two questions from Rob. One of them is actually about analogs. How do you see analog linking to Oasis 24? This is important also for PESC, because most countries are proposing analog missions. So right. This is one question. Another question is 1 minute. How should the working group reference the Oasis 2045?
Yeah, so you could just reference it as a NVA Oasis 2045. I mean, that's a perfectly good citation in terms of the working discussions. And then of course there are individual papers and presentations that can be cited. in terms of more academic references. Most of the analog work that I've seen is more closely related to nearer term, shorter term activities, like the those that'll be seen during the Artemis program. I think there's really a dearth of activities that are looking at permanent lunar outposts, such as that being proposed by China, or human settlements, such as the Oasis 2045. So I think there's a lack, there's a need for more analog activities that are related to the longer term future on the moon. If you want to think of it as such a thing, to some extent, the Biosphere 2 in the US is a version of an analog for a closed loop biologically enabled life support system. I think it's got some shortcomings because it's not an especially good analog. It's not actually biologically self-sufficient, but it is nevertheless, especially given when it was done, it's groundbreaking and really important. But I do think there are great opportunities for more analog work relating to the longer term future of the moon.
Yeah.
Very good.
Thank you, John. Yeah. Rob is commenting also about the analog working group. Mm-hmm. Selecting many analog sites in the developing world. This is amazing, and I really want to discuss this in more details with you, Rob. Maybe in the future. I would like to show you activities from local teams, PESC teams, and also I would like to invite you in the future, because you will listen in the monthly webinars more about analog missions. Okay, maybe we have one more time for one question. One more minute for another question. Okay, I think that's it for today. Again, I would like to thank the Vice President of the Moon Village Association for presenting about the Moon Oasis 2045. Thank you very much for attending. I saw names from different working groups as well. And also thank you for the PESC participation. We would like to link your roadmaps with the new version of the Moon Oasis 2045. And stay tuned for next month. I wish you a great night.
Thanks, Ghanem.
Goodbye.